It began as a routine La Liga evening, a newly promoted Oviedo hosting a global powerhouse, but what should have been remembered for the scoreline instead left a stain that stretched far beyond the 90 minutes. Midway through the first half, Kylian Mbappé fired the opener, and the joy of the visiting team's celebration was met not only with applause, but in at least 2 instances captured on broadcast cameras, with a grotesque imitation of monkey noises aimed squarely at the Real Madrid stars. The second episode came late when Vinícius Jr. walked onto the turf. Once again, a sliver of the crowd produced the same demeaning sounds, audible at the Carlos Tartiere and replayed on shows that dissect the week's football. La Liga didn't treat this as a bad night to shrug off. After reviewing the footage, it moved to lodge a formal complaint, signalling that the governing body sees this as more than isolated taunts, and instead as an offence that requires legal and sporting scrutiny. Real Oviedo's president, Martin Pelliz, reacted swiftly and publicly condemning the behaviour, promising full cooperation with authorities and launching an internal investigation to identify those responsible, while also urging that the conduct of a few should not define the club's fan base as a whole. That defence is important context, but it can't erase the pattern. Across Spain over recent seasons, there have been repeated episodes where players of colour, notably Vinícius in past years, plus young stars like Lamine Yamal and others, have been targeted. Each new incident returns the conversation to uncomfortable truths about stadium culture, policing, and the mechanisms clubs use, or fail to use, to protect players. The optics here are damning because they were not whispered or behind closed doors. They were captured on camera, replayed on national programmes and social platforms, and therefore became evidence rather than hearsay. That matters legally and practically. Recorded abuse gives La Liga and state authorities a firmer ground to pursue sanctions, which may include fines, partial or full stadium closures, individual bans for those identified, and even criminal proceedings if prosecutors agree there's a hate crime angle. For the club and its supporters, the fallout presents painful choices. How to police terraces without turning every match into a security clampdown. How to balance fan passion with clear lines of decency. How to educate or eject the tiny but toxic minorities whose actions drag entire communities into disgrace. For Real Madrid, the wounds are familiar. For Vinícius, a player who has been repeatedly targeted before, this is another episode in an ongoing battle that has seen him, teammates and the club push both for matchday protections and for broader cultural change. The immediate next steps are procedural but consequential. La Liga's referral will go to the relevant anti-violence and competition committees. Oviedo's internal probe will try to identify culprits from camera angles and steward reports, and law enforcement will determine whether there's grounds for criminal investigation. But beyond committees and courtrooms sits a tougher challenge: changing attitudes. That requires clubs to step beyond platitudes and towards proactive measures, naming and banning offenders on the spot, deploying better stewarding in sensitive sections, training volunteer fan groups to intervene, and working with broadcasters to ensure abusive acts are not only condemned but used as evidence toward accountability. The moment at Carlos Tartiere is a call to action because it underscores a truth too often glossed over. Progress in stadium culture is fragile and can be undone in seconds by a few people who choose to humiliate instead of support. As the investigation unfolds, fans across Spain and beyond will be watching for meaningful consequences, not token gestures. They will measure whether La Liga and Oviedo act decisively or allow yet another episode to be filed under a regrettable but minor. If institutions are serious about stamping out racism, this is the kind of case where they must show results, identification, punishment, and a visible plan to prevent recurrence. Otherwise, the same footage will be replayed months from now with a new set of names and the same outrage. For now, the footage is the evidence. The file has been opened, and the conversation that will determine whether football learns or merely laments has only just begun.